Welcome to the Intelligent Teams podcast, where we interview leading thinkers from business and the sciences of mind to find new ways to help your teams and organizations thrive. I'm your host, Daniel Sasser. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you'll enjoy being a subscriber to the Intelligent Teams Substack. To receive a free weekly article or podcast with explorations of teams and cognitive science, complete with tools and tips, go to intelligentteams.substack.com and click subscribe. This week's guest is a facilitator of learning and people connector, Charles-Louis Damar. Welcome, Charles-Louis.
Thank you, Daniel.
Charles-Louis, what do you do for a living?
I hold a space for stuff to happen. So pragmatically, people call me because maybe there's some teams that don't work well together, or they have this strategic initiative that they want to do, but they were a bit like scared or worried about stuff, or there's lots of uncertainties. And we figure out maybe what needs to happen. Maybe it's a couple of workshops, maybe it's some trainings, maybe it's a combination of everything. But the idea is that I work at my best when we have an idea of where we want to go, but we don't hold too tight on the outcome.
So can you give an example of that?
Yes. So I'll give a little bit of a backstory. A couple of years ago, I think in the early months of lockdown, a friend of mine called me from an organization in Switzerland or whatever, and they are from the business side of the organization. So it's a hospital, and she's on the kind of a medical part, but also in a conversation with the IT department. And so that person tells me, hey, Charles-Louis, I've recently been on a training about Scrum, and I've seen a couple of stuff there, and there's a role that I'm not quite sure about, and I'd like to have your input on this. I'm like, okay. And that friend was like, hey, you see the product owner? Would it make sense to say that the product owner is actually representing the business and should be in a business? And I'm like, well, yeah, the product owner are the ones who kind of prioritize and stuff like that. So yeah, of course, it totally makes sense. And so the friend went on, so could you maybe explain to me or tell me how come that in our organization, the product owner is indeed the IT department? So in that situation, what happens is those product owners who know not much about I'm going to say business, it's a hospital, but the business side of things, they come to us, they ask us what the priorities are, what we need to work on, and what they need to work on, and so on. And ultimately, afterwards, what they do is they write tickets, and then they reprioritize, and they shuffle everything, and then they kind of explain to the tech team what they need to do. So there's a kind of many things that are lost in translation. And I'm like, well, bang on, so thank you. There's not many people who get that, but this is really what a product owner is about. And so then it was like, okay, but could you maybe help us in getting the product owner role outside of IT in the business? And so I was like, okay, yeah, let's figure it out. I have no clear plan, but the thing is, this is something that we need to explore together, because based on our conversation, I don't know how your organization works, because you have your own view on this, but ultimately it's the people doing the work that will shape the way that tomorrow's ways of working will look like. So ultimately what happened is we ran a series of workshops with all the people involved to kind of shape, hey, what does it look like today? And sprinkle a little bit of theory on Scrum, because ultimately these people are software developers or they are from the medical staff, so they don't need the whole theory. They just need enough so that they can adapt their ways of working. So they need to know a little bit of retrospectives about the priorities and so on. But ultimately what was really important is to know what are the responsibilities of the IT department, what are the responsibilities of the business side, and how do we work together? And so this is something that right from the start I said, I have no plan, I have an idea of what we could try, but ultimately it's by getting in contact with human beings, talking to the people and letting you figure it out, that will get the best results. And I often take them as an example, and I say, my clients never call me back because they don't need me anymore. So, like we sometimes see each other and have lunch, and then they tell me how they've been adapting their ways of working. What I love is that it's self-sustainable. So there you go.
So in that situation, it sounded like your role was to take what the people in that hospital already knew about their work and about their lives and about what they needed, and help them discover themselves what they needed to solve their own problem, rather than coming in with like, well, why don't you try my thing and this thing that I can do, and like, let me pitch you on how to make that work. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really using their context, using their context, and also using whatever theory they need to move forward, but not more. So that they could be interested. If they wanted to know more, there was reference enough. You can find a lot of things online. I would send them out. But in the synchronous sessions, we would really focus on, okay, what's the next roadblock? What's the next bump that you see on the road? And what would be helpful? For instance, I remember one conversation about the estimations done by the people doing the work, and the people at the business side were always complaining that these estimations were too high. And on the other side,
which would mean they're slower, or what would that mean to them?
It would mean that if they said that this was gonna take so much, or that this would be so big, they would say, just go faster, or it's never as much as that. And on the other side, we had also the IT team that would look at the business and say, actually these priorities, we have other priorities that are more important. I told the people from the business side, these people who are doing the work, their responsibility is really crafting what you need. So if you want to support them in their work and they tell you that the estimation is so much, trust them. Why would they bloat the estimation? Just trust them that the estimation is correct, because they have more experience in doing the thing than you have. And so, of course, the whole people from the IT were then smiling and look at their colleagues like, ha ha ha. But then I was like, hey, by the way, if you are to be trusted on your estimations, I will ask you also to look at your colleagues from the business side, and they know the stuff from the hospital, they know the day-to-day lives of the medical staff and so on. So when they tell you about priorities, trust them as well. Because, and so then they were both like, okay, got me. But ultimately it's that, right?
There's something so, I don't know what the word is, so nice or so refreshing or so healthy about trusting that within this system you probably have all of the expertise and the knowledge and the attention that you need. It's just not it's not shared, it's not networked well. You've got all the information in this big group mind to solve the problem is there. You just need to help it spread and be used well by all the different people, and then your job is to make that easier.
Yeah, and this is where the facilitation comes in, because, okay, just talk to one another, that won't help. Just talk it through. Well, complex, because whatever. And so by using facilitated activities or structures, the idea is really to let people share their own views of the context and figure out together what's the next step.
Why can't people just sit together and sort this stuff out? Why do we need help?
People are usually very good at what they do, what they spend most of their time doing. My daughter is learning upholstery, so she's very good at upholstery. I'm self-employed. I'm a facilitator. I'm very good at facilitating. And this is like me boasting a little bit. However, there's stuff that I do less often, like accounting and doing the numbers. This is not my usual way of things. I get better at it, but ultimately I need somebody who's good at that to help me and to support me, to kind of tell me, hey, shall we be careful about this? Who knows all the laws around, taxes and stuff, to facilitate my work. So I think people have different areas of expertise. And if I'm very good at, doing diagnostics and so on, and treating patients, that doesn't mean that it's easy for me to communicate what I need to people who are writing code.
There's an analogy I've seen in a few different places about cyclists in New York. So like various scenarios in which there's like a group of people who are sort of systematically find things harder. It's like being a cyclist in New York, where like the roads are just not set up for you. They're set up for the cars. So you're allowed to cycle in New York. There's nothing wrong with cycling on the roads. And there are maybe like rubbish little cycle lanes in certain parts of New York. I'm sure there are lots of parts of New York that are very cycle friendly. Forgive me. I don't know which imaginary pro cyclist New Yorker just got upset, but I just appeased them, so it's all fine. But we can understand why the system is set up in such a way that makes this legal and encouraged activity of cycling difficult. And so too, the system is set up in a hospital or in a company or whatever, such that naturally people will gravitate towards their own area of expertise and interest, and that's good, and we want that because we want those techie people being like super techie and knowing about all the migrations. But it's set up in a way that's hard for them to communicate well with the other people as a default, maybe, and that means that there's certain tensions built in.
Yeah. And this also reminds me of the ways that ultimately, with the ways that we like to separate things to make them easier to grasp. For instance, at school, I will learn mathematics. I will learn geography. I will learn history. I will learn many, many, many different things. But I read a quote earlier today, so I'm definitely going to misquote it. And I don't even remember who said it. But it was like, ultimately, a cup of tea is a lesson on fluid dynamics, on colonization, on, different things. But a cup of tea is all that. But when we separate the maths from history, from whatever, we also do not create a platform for people to link stuff from different sources together. And ultimately, that's what we need if we want to work together.
Because the problems cut across those different divisions or those different boundaries, and the problems that you face in a hospital require knowledge from both or all sides
from all experts in the room.
Yeah.
And so I imagine now if, university or high school programs, instead of doing group work, of organizing group work with people from the same faculty, would have people from whatever engineering faculty work together with people from law and from different faculties on one single project. That would probably be much more lifelike from what one sees on the work floor.
Yeah, and so many of the problems we face in our workplaces are different us and them problems created within a group that is very much supposed to be aligned in purpose and in capability and in things like that. So how did you realize this was something you were good at?
Okay, how did I realize this was something I was good at? So I'm not sure how I did realize that. I think, through, feedback from people. I started with a team and facilitating regular retrospectives, just with, like a book and figuring out, okay, there's these activities. And actually, when we do these activities, people talk more than when I tell them, hey, just talk it out. And then I started becoming more and more interested into whatever's gravitating around this. Because I have a background in software development. So, and, systems admin stuff. So like I've written Perl scripts, done some database migration, whatever. But ultimately I realized that as soon as you crack the code for how machines work together, it's easy. / boring, I would say. I mean, this is my view. It's not boring because, there's always tough nuts to crack. But I found that there was an equation that was guaranteed to be different each time. Is like how do people cooperate? There's so many, many different variables, so many, many different parameters, depending on whether you've had a good night or not, depending on the organization, the culture, depending on tradition and everything. But ultimately, every day we see people who work together and achieve great stuff. How does that work? Beyond all the difficulties that could prevent them from working well together, we see countless days where this happens. And I got very curious about that. And I started doing more of this. And I remember a couple of years ago at one of my clients where I was facilitating stuff. It was in the IT, so I was an agile coach there. And then one person said, Sean, we've got many people who've done their certifications and stuff like that on Scrum Master and Agile Coach. But there's one thing that you bring that they can't. For instance, when we have a complex situation where we don't know what to do, we call you, you do a half-day workshop or a full-day workshop or whatever. Basically, you bring people together, and ultimately, at the end, everyone leaves happy, smiling with tangible action items and stuff that they're gonna do, and they do it. And that's where I realized that I was good at what I did, because I saw results. I saw that stuff was different from before and after. Is that correlation, causation? I don't know. So, I rest my judgment on that. But yeah, there was something there.
So, what are some of the other ways that you see that people solve those same problems, but sort of less effectively, right? So the thing you were offering was bringing people together, half day or full day workshop, some structure that produces the clarity. If it weren't for that, what might people be doing otherwise?
Yeah, so I'm going to give one example on that, and then we can elaborate on what that may be, because ultimately it's different each time. A couple of years ago, I was asked to teach a team. So basically, this organization was going through a kind of transformation, like changing the ways of working and so on, and they had a playbook with how teams should work. And they told me, so the people who contacted me said, our teams are a bit confused by this playbook, so they want to know what they should be doing, how they should work together. And they were like, okay, so could you tell them what they need to do and give them the theory bit, or give them the best practices. We have half an hour with them. And I think that the way that, because ultimately you all had a different starting point, obviously, but you will acknowledge how different it is from your starting point and see how you can refine it, better it. And ultimately, in doing so, you create a collective picture of what that ways of working was like. After that, I don't remember whether I did another iteration or not. Ultimately, we had half an hour. But in the end, I asked every group to kind of present their ways of working to the rest. So their refined ways of working to the rest. And then they realize, oh, we don't even have the same starting point. We don't even have the same understanding of how we work. And I'm like, well, so if you want to adapt your ways of working to a different way, it might be good to already know where we're starting from. So we need that clarity first. And I was like, would you like to explore this further so that we can figure out how you work well together? And then they say, yeah. And then I said, yeah, we might need half a day for that. No problem. So ultimately, I created from something that would probably be very top down. This is how you should do it, but with no tangible steps or tangible ways, probably leaving people very confused at the end of that half an hour with theory. I mean, I left them confused as well. Yeah, that's probably true. But I think that confusion gave more of an idea of what could happen next than if we had presented the theory. Then again, I have no data to compare that to.
Well, even the approach of, even if you left them sort of more confused than when they joined, it was their own confusion. Whereas the approach from before was me as a teacher coming in and sharing my confusion or the things that I think are interesting, and then leaving them confused about the things that are important to me. Whereas with something like the technique you used, and I want to hear maybe a bit more about World Cafe maybe, or more techniques like it. It allows the group to ask the questions that are important to them within the bounds of, how do we work together, which is a very loose thing. And then it means that if you leave them with confusion, at least it's confusion that they've offered, and that, of course, they're going to be more motivated to try and answer that. And then, well, why should I come back and talk to you about ways of working? It's because it solves the team's confusion, as opposed to why should I come and tell you about the things that I think are important.
Yeah, I'd like to go even more on that confusion, because I use confusion as a tool to bring about change. I've realized when people are confused, it's uncomfortable, and that means that people who are, it's about finding the right balance of uncomfortableness, right? But when it's uncomfortable, it's like when you've got a pebble in your shoe, or when you're sitting not quite right. You just want to do something to change and to be in a better situation. And this is where change requires very little effort. With a little bit of confusion sprinkled in the right way, people will want to get out of that uncomfortable situation, and so they will take the energy to figure out what needs to happen to get into a more stable situation. Whereas if I leave them comfortable, it's like, watching a movie. Yeah, you might watch a thriller or a slasher movie that might make you uncomfortable, but ultimately you know that there's no risk. You'll just do the thing.
There's a phrase I heard you use in a workshop that you were running that was, you're giving the instructions for like the next bit or whatever, and you said, I guess I want to check that the instructions, are they clear enough, but also are they vague enough?
Yeah, actually, I just use the last bit. So when I give instruction for a workshop, like, okay, you're going to work in teams and do this and this. And then the only question I ask, is it vague enough?
So for listeners might be confused. They'd be like, well, hang on, if I'm in a workshop, I don't want it to be vague. I want it to be clear, right? So I know what question I'm answering. Why bring vagueness into it?
So, okay, Daniel. So, what did you have for lunch today?
Sweet potato with salsa and fish.
Okay, thank you. The instructions were very precise, I guess, and so you know what to answer very easy, right? Probably little chance of getting it wrong, except if you just forgot what you had. But if I'd asked you, hey, Daniel, what was maybe the most interesting thing that happened for you today at lunchtime? What was it?
It was actually quite a delicious sweet potato with fish. But I went for a walk with the dog.
So, we have the same starting point, your lunchtime. But ultimately the answer is different. But now, the fact that you went for a walk with the dog can give us extra information than just okay, what did you have for lunch? It was this. So, having a very clear question with maybe one or two possible answers actually creates a situation where we've all been to school, we want to be good students, so we want to give the right answer. They would usually do it or see it as like somebody would bring slides, bring the theory, this is what you need to do, yada yada. And then the session ends, questions, comments, no, thank you, bye, or something. Maybe questions, and so address the questions, but ultimately, bye. And by doing so, does not address the way how that theory or that ideal state ties back into those people in the room's daily context. In half an hour, we didn't provide the space for them to do that. So the thing asked about, like, is this half an hour a real, like, limit? They were like, yeah, because it's ultimately we got them all together because there's some other work they need to be doing. And we have this half an hour and we thought this would be great just to kind of, remind them how they need to work together. And I was like, what would you like the outcome be in this half an hour? Would you like to apply it? They say, yeah. I'm like, this is not going to happen, because ultimately they won't have time to kind of grasp the concepts. And so what I'm offering is something, it may be a workshop. No, it will be a workshop. Half an hour, no problem. But at the end of the workshop, we will see whether or not they will want a longer time to explore that way of working, so that they can bring it back to their context. And so what I did in half an hour was basically, so we had 40 people. I set them into different groups and I said, okay, just figure out, you have flip charts, try and draw your current ways of working, your methodology. I told them I'm not interested into the software process that you follow, but just like when you've got an idea and then you produce it, how does that happen? How do you all work together? So we had 3 or 4 teams. And then I used, some people might be familiar with the World Café facilitation technique. So basically I'm going to explain how it's like. I asked a couple of people to stay at the flip charts, and I asked the other people to move to a different flip chart, basically spreading through different groups. So that meant that in the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes, people would arrive at the flip chart that they had not created, And they would see people from different groups join on a single flip chart. And then I asked them, oh, check this picture, and this is not the place where you need to correct it. Normal. Human behavior, we don't want to get the stick. I can understand that. The thing is, it actually also constrains the mind into thinking an answer that can please me, Charles, the facilitator, which may not be relevant or useful to the people themselves, because there's one thing. When people call me to do some workshops, usually I don't know the context. I may have asked a couple of questions, but the only view I have is the view from the people I interviewed. The ones who are day in, day out in their own context are the people in the room. So when I ask, is it vague enough? The idea is that at least it gives a sense of direction. I want to know about your lunchtime. Taking this example, I want to know about what happened on your lunchtime. But tell me what's most relevant to you.
And I guess it can be too vague, right? Which is if you said like, tell me something interesting. Well, then
Yeah.
like, I don't know how to answer that because like from when?
Yeah. I have that sometimes when people say, oh, Charles, you can speak Dutch. Tell me something in Dutch. And then I'm like, okay, where am I going to start? And then, come on, you can speak Dutch, right? So come on, just tell me something. Well, so this is the thing. So there's too vague, there's too precise, and then there's the sweet spot, which is a lifelong journey to find, and that's the vague enough.
And there's a sort of there's like a philosophical orientation there that I really like, which is I, as the facilitator, do not know what the answer is to this question, because if I knew the answer, then I would just tell you, right? And if you knew the answer, then someone would have told it by now, right? So between me and you and all of us, the right answer is present, but it needs to be assembled or dusted off, or it needs to emerge, I guess, in complexity language. So if you're going to allow for something to emerge, then you can't overfit it to like, this is what I think the answer is going to be, because then you'll get something that is precise but wrong. Right, you'll get like a very clear answer to tell me about your lunch.
And probably not useful.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the wrong thing, because you said precise but wrong. It's precise. It can be right. But the key thing is I want the stuff that we talk about to be relevant and useful for what's next. And indeed, I don't know the context. A couple of years ago, I worked online teaching facilitation techniques and like it was a cohort on facilitation to a group of feminists, a group of women from the Philippines. So it was on a couple of months. We would meet a couple of hours every week. First session starts, I'm like, I'm Charles. As you can see, I'm your white middle-aged man in front of a group of women who work in a feminist group that started as a support group for survivors of gender-based violence. So the group is called Luna's Collective, by the way. I'm like, okay, I'm your white middle-aged man. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I don't know what it's like to live in the Philippines. I have, luckily, no experience with gender-based violence. So I know nothing about your context. I do know stuff about facilitation, but the last thing I want is this to be a colonial white man knows everything and gonna tell you what you need to do. So like, I will need your input, your criticism, your openness to kind of tell me, Charles, hey, what's happening here, we don't see how it will work. We need something different, or I need you to create a link with your context. And that actually really sparked a tremendous cooperation with that team, and yeah, we still stay in touch. Sometimes they send pictures from the workshops they run, so it's really cool. Never been to the Philippines. I'd love to go one day, but yeah. So I think the facilitator doesn't know is something that really helps, because ultimately then they realize, okay, we need to do some work too.
The cultural, I want to say the word like contingency, but that's like a wanky word. So I guess like the cultural like specificity or the cultural nuances of showing up as well also can be invisible to us. And that story reminded me, I went to Cambodia last year with my girlfriend, and a friend of mine lives there and said, hey, do you want to come run some stuff about facilitation in our charity? And it's this like, it's a charity, they do environmental conservation work. I was explaining some of these ideas of facilitation and about like inclusive decision making and like equal voices and all this stuff, and someone said like, yeah, but sometimes you're sitting in a room with like the chief of the tribe and like the general of the like dictatorship's army and like a bunch of other people, and like what they say does go in a different way. And I realized at that moment, I was like, okay, and my assumption about what good facilitation looks like is based in my experiences in tech, in London, in people who speak my language, and maybe some of the principles can be distilled out and would be useful there. And I know that like Sam Kaner, who wrote the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making, mouthful of a title, but wonderful book. Whew,
Yeah.
did a lot of work with lots of indigenous communities and lots of non-Western context in order to get buy-in on communal activities and initiatives and things like that. But we still come with an assumption about what good inclusion looks like, or what good facilitation looks like, or which structures should or shouldn't exist, or certain values that we may not realize. We may think this is just good group conversation, and actually that might be different in the Philippines or in Cambodia or in somewhere else where there are different norms.
Yeah, and so what you're telling now also enlightens me. I think the fact that I've worked with NGOs, the fact that I've worked with non-profit associations, and not only in tech, I would say Europe-ish thing, has helped me to see what can be universal truths, whatever it is, truths for now. What can be universal principles that we can apply and question, and that will work in situation, because we also had the situation like, okay, sometimes we want to facilitate conversations about gender-based violence in the village, and then there's the chief of the village that has been abusing a lot of the women that are working for him in the plant. So how do you go about that? Well, that's a good one. I mean, that's a tough one to kind of have something like, we need to do something about that gender-based violence, but how can we talk about a taboo topic in such a circumstance?
You had to come up with a list of those sort of principles. Sketch one out together. What might that look like?
Yeah, so my friend and mentor Francis Lademan has a list of principles that really inspire me a lot, and like they're the base of the Shotenketsu work. A couple of them that I'm just gonna shout out is Hodo Hodo, based on the Japanese design philosophy of just enough. So the idea is that whatever workshop or whatever thing that you run is just enough design. So don't overthink it, don't overdo it. I know facilitators who plan their whole one-day workshop with, a facilitated thing that lasts for 4 hours. I may be exaggerating a bit, but minute by minute, this is what happens then, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. But in my experience, usually after the first or the second thing, the whole plan is not useful anymore because stuff's gone on a tangent. Not a tangent that is worthless. Usually when they go on a tangent, it's something worth exploring. So with just enough design, when I approach a workshop, usually I know maybe the first few things that I'm gonna run, and I also know that I have enough stuff in my backpack to be able to adapt on the fly. And the people that I teach facilitation to, we use these principles throughout. And so this is something that you can only grow through practice, is the ability to think on your feet. Maybe if I make a parallel with improv theater. Usually theater is not scripted. You take a couple of ideas from the audience and then you start and then you do things. And your preparation is minimal. The difference with improv and workshop facilitation is that improv usually doesn't have a set outcome or a set goal. It can go in any direction and it will be great. With workshop facilitation, we are still there to kind of discuss a topic, and at some point we'll need to wrap it up. So this is where, as a facilitator, you also need to practice mindful observation to kind of check, okay, where are we? Where is the group? Where is the, whatever outcome or direction we wanted to take? What's needed to move, towards the right direction? and so on. So it's a constant dance of being with the group, being towards the outcome, being with the activities, and so on. So this is easier with Hodo Hodo, with the minimum, with just enough design.
Like a lightweight.
Yeah,
The word
lightweight.
comes to mind.
Yeah.
I always find whenever I prepare a workshop, and I like, it's almost the ones where I over prepare or I have some fancy like ta-da. By the time we get to that ta-da, it's like, well, this is no longer relevant at all. Okay, that was a waste of my time. Never mind. And much easier to have like the ingredients of like, where do we roughly want to be by this point, or something like that.
And an example, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Lithuania, so I'm running this facilitation cohort at Vinted there. And we were roughly so we are doing some online stuff and some in-person stuff, and we were at the 2/3 of the cohort. Day one, we explored a couple of things and techniques, and then based on what happened, I realized that some of the things that I had planned for day two might not be useful. So I started day two by listing some principles. You may be familiar with them. The first one was whoever comes are the right people. The second principle was whatever happens is the only thing that could happen, or something. Then it starts whenever it starts, it's over when it's over, and wherever it happens is the only place where it could happen. And then I say that these principles have been applied for some specific work. Yes, they have been used in conferences, but if you want to solve some complex work, these principles from open space technology are key to let the right conversations happen at the right time for a group.
So just to like clarify some of the terms, so open space technology is...
Open space technology is a way of gathering. I mean, maybe you've heard about open space. So open space is not the fact that there's tables in the office and with people where you can hear each other shout. It's not that. The open space technology is a way of organizing. It can be conferences or unconferences, or it's a way of gathering people for some work so that there is an outcome at the end. And it's not prescriptive. The only rules are like these principles. What happens usually is that you get a lightweight frame with possible tracks of an agenda, and then people figure out how to fill the agenda. They don't need to pre-fill the agenda right from the start. I mean, in unconferences that usually happens, but when you use that to uncover some complex work, usually the first few sessions are planned and then the rest of the agenda will be adapted by the people themselves based on what happened before. So, coming back to that team, I told them these are the principles and it's been used in organizations for doing work and also for conferences. And it works, but then people said, but it's total chaos, like whatever happens is the right thing, is the only thing that could happen, and the only people who are there are the right people. How could you get some meaningful work done? I'm like, yeah, I get it all the time. It's totally fine to be kind of anxious about this. So I said, we're gonna try it out. We're gonna apply this to ourselves. So my way of changing the agenda of day two was like, we're gonna do an open space. Here is an agenda. There will be 2 tracks and 3 slots, so that's 6 slots in total. You want to redo some activities that we did before to kind of refine them? Fine. You want to explore some specific topics? Fine. The only thing is I'm going to add context. The context of your open space today will be we are on a facilitative learning track. And that means if you want to talk about beekeeping, well, it might not be totally aligned. But who am I? Could be. And they say, and what if there's nothing that comes on the agenda? I say, well, if there's nothing that comes up, I've got some ideas, but I'd like to give you the space to do it first. And obviously, the agenda was filled quite easily. They had some nice conversations. The topics that they brought forward were really, really powerful. And I said, now it's up to you. You want to facilitate something, you want to explore something, you have a question, I'll just be a participant like anyone else. And when they debriefed, they were like, oh wow, that was really amazing, super powerful, super helpful. One person got answers on how to tweak his agenda for a workshop he ran the day after. So he just kind of dropped most of the fun stuff and keep the relevant stuff, relevant activities. Another person, because we see activities that we can do with large groups, but another person had very small groups. And so like, how can we tweak the activities we've seen to small groups? Again, answers given by the participants. And so ultimately, the one person that said, but it's total chaos and so on, ultimately he said, we usually go to conferences with some of our team members to learn stuff, and with the hope that we can apply it at our work. And last time we were going to a 2-day conference, and I had asked my director whether we could have, after the conference, 1 extra day for the team to run an open space. That person was anxious about, but what if nothing interesting comes out of it? And so ultimately that person told me, but if I spin it in the way like, let's have an open space after the conference, and the theme is like, how can we bring back what we learned and bring it to our context, so that it becomes something with a tangible thing. So I think what that person realized is an open space without a theme, or without, like a purpose, or whatever the word you want to use, well, anything can happen there and it can be scary. But framing it, this is the nut we're going to crack, gives maybe more direction, is more helpful for the...
It's too open space is too vague without a context, right? Without a structure and a structuring invitation in.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nice one. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So I want to close the loops of. So you mentioned hodo.
Yeah. Hodo. Yeah.
Hodo. Are there other principles that sit alongside that, or is that like the?
Well, there's a couple of others. I talked about practicing mindful observation to kind of be aware of whatever happens with the team towards the objectives and so on. But also it's something that we need to facilitate a maximum exposure. What I will do is I will send you a link of the article by Francis Lahnemann on Medium that has all these principles listed. So that can be a lot of things. Then there's also some other principles that I steal or I borrow from Tyagi or Sivasalam Tyagarajan, another one of my friends and mentors. I think it's called Build the Airplane While Flying It. So, if you take this literally, I do not recommend this practice, so don't try this at home. But build the airplane while flying it is also an invitation to kind of not overthink it and not overplan it. You might get some insights later on that will be useful, so you might be happy to have left some space for adaptation. So this is really the key, and to me the facilitators who can do the most meaningful work are the ones who can adapt and adjust on the fly towards a better outcome. So it's not just adjusting, that's too vague. Adjusting towards a better outcome, that's vague enough.
Yeah, it reminds me of Dave Snowden's idea of like recipe followers versus chefs. That you can have people that they cook by following recipes exactly as they are, or people who are chefs who understand how the ingredients interact and might have certain like patterns as starting points, but they go, hey, we don't have butter, can we use margarine? Or what are we going to have to do if we only have olive oil? And they understand enough of it to be able to cook or to be a chef. So maybe it's that with facilitation.
Yes, and one does not go without the other. So you need to have the practice of the recipe follower. You need to have practiced enough by the book before you can understand on a deeper level, or no, not understand. It's not about like a cognitive thing. I don't want it to sound fluffy. So what I want to say is like, without this practice and this seeing what works and what doesn't, and again, maybe practicing mindful observation, this is where you will learn and build your chef skills. If that, I don't know if that sounds confusing.
Say more about mindful observation. What does that mean and how does that work?
So it's about when you practice stuff. Okay, let's take the other thing. There's a saying that goes like, you learn by doing, right? However, if you're doing things the wrong way over and over and over and over and over and over again, you will not learn stuff. I could learn to open and close the door with my back pressed to a door. I could do it all the time. This is how I open doors, with my back pressed to the door, or turned, not necessarily pressed, but turned to the door. It works, the door opens. But unless I stop and reflect on my practice, I cannot grow, get better, I cannot. So I think that's it.
It reminds me of learning to play a musical instrument where when I'm a terrible piano player, and one of the things that makes me a terrible piano player is I'll often pick a piece of music and then sort of learn all the notes, and then if I want to be able to perform this thing, when I make mistakes, I don't go back and check that I can play the whole thing without mistakes. And then when it comes to the performance, I've sort of bedded in the same mistakes over and over again. And every time I practice it, I go, it doesn't matter. And also, it doesn't matter. But then if it, to the extent that I want to be able to play a piece of music nicely and like have the sense of fluency and enjoyment of it, well, I rob myself of that opportunity by not ironing out my mistakes as I go. So I embed that in. So, not all practice is good practice.
Yeah, exactly. There needs to be some reflection on the practice. Otherwise, you're just doing stuff.
Well, because we're
Whatever
really good
that means.
Well, we're really good at learning stuff and carrying it out, even the wrong stuff or even the stuff that's harmful. So we bring in patterns and we'll roll them out again.
Yeah, this is the thing. Ultimately, people pay money for what I do. They call me, I charge money for that. So I'd rather be good at what I do. I don't want to be a fraud. So I need to be mindful of doing stuff that will not work or that may not be the best answer. If I come in with all my fancy stuff and, hey, I've got this fantastic workshop, but every time somebody says something, wait, that's not what was planned. Put it on the parking lot. One of the things that I hate, the parking lot, but that's another conversation. Put it on the parking lot and so on. And okay, and then everybody moves and follows the plan that I have created. Maybe in cooperation with some other people from the organization, but usually not with the people who do the work. Or even worse, I have that conversation with the sponsors, and then the only people that are in the workshop are people I have never seen and never worked with. So, the ivory tower thinking does not work in that scenario.
Yeah. Why do you hate the parking lot so much? And what is a parking lot as well? Because maybe not everyone will have heard that term.
Yeah. So in conventional teaching, facilitation and stuff, I've heard it said, and I've done it in the past as well. So this is my, I've done it as well. It was said that, people are there to learn something or to do something. And it might happen that some people want to talk about something else. So it is important to them, however, they are still there to learn something. So when there's something that you as a facilitator or teacher deem is not relevant, you just say to that person, hey, that's a great idea, or a variation thereof. Could you please write that idea down on a post-it note or whatever, a sticky note? And I have created this flip chart with a parking lot, and you just put it there. At the end of the session, day, whatever, we will review everything that is there. In practice, I have rarely ever seen it used, and even when there were 30 sticky notes, if we took the time to go over them, people would just maybe have forgotten what it was about, or they would say, look at their watch, you know what, no, it's okay. So in effect, all these things that were on the parking lot have not been treated, which could be a measure of ultimately, you see, it was not important because they don't want to talk about it. What I realize is more effective is when people bring something up. It's probably because they see a relationship. Apart if they ask, okay, when's the lunchtime? But that's another question. But if they bring something up, it's probably because they see something that I don't see. So I'm curious. And I'd rather take 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes to kind of explore, okay, tell me more about this. And what's the link that you see and how is this relevant and so on? So that the person in itself can tell me, okay, this is what I need in order to close that thing. And then get on with the thing, with the rest of the workshop or the training. than to have them write it on a piece of paper, put it there, being kind of nervous, okay, will he address it or not, and kind of not listen to or not participate to what's happening. So the key thing in group work, in collective work, is we want everyone's contribution. And the reason why I hate, okay, hate is maybe the reason why I hate parking lots is, in a way, it removes a person's agency to say something that could be relevant, because the risk is that somebody else will tell them, oh, put it on a parking lot, and then it just removes their participation.
So practically speaking, I'm facilitating a workshop and someone is saying something and they are going down their pet thing, and they're like, and they ascend the soapbox, and once they're on this topic, everyone in the room knows, right, it's half an hour before the end of this thing will happen. As a facilitator, how do you respect that person's agency whilst also respecting the other people in the room who don't want to be on that, or the context that we've originally gathered for, where this is sort of moving forward?
So there's several options for that. The one thing is, because it's very rare that a person has a 30-minute monologue on their own. I have not seen that yet. So usually people, hey, I want to say something about this. Okay, cool, great. And then usually I ask a couple of questions like, okay, can I just check? What is this all about? And maybe tell me a little bit more of this. And how do you see this linked to what we are doing right now? So I kind of ask questions to frame this and to also invite that person to themselves create the link. And then while they're talking about this, I can ask some other people, hey, do you recognize this? Or, who's of a different opinion? So like the opportunity of that person to bring about their idea is one thing. And I also want to respect the fact that they're not the only one in that session. And so maybe people have different opinions. So let's take this as an opportunity to explore what different people see about that. And then, okay, and usually what happens after 5 to 10 minutes, the subject on itself, I mean, it may happen that it was something that we didn't see and that we need to address and take in, and then this is what I do. But what often happens as well is that, okay, ultimately I can see that it's important, but maybe not that important or whatever. Like, the subject finds closure by itself, if that makes sense.
You sort of trust the group that to handle the conversation responsibly, and that's very coherent with your approach.
Yeah. Who am I to know whether it's relevant or not, ultimately?
There's something, that reminds me earlier, like, as facilitator, bugbear of mine is when the facilitator says, great idea. I love that contribution, especially with something like check-in, where a check-in is a thing you do at the beginning of you can do at the beginning of a session where everyone sort of gets a chance to speak and share something. And when the facilitator says to someone, I love that, and they don't say it to the next person, I'm like, what message does that send to the person whose idea isn't like beloved by the facilitator? And the facilitator has a lot of power and influence, and like the way we choose to validate certain things to others matters.
Yeah, and to me, this is where I may put a distinction between facilitating learning and facilitating towards whatever a business outcome. When we facilitate learning, for instance, if it's about learning how to cook, well, if somebody comes up with an idea that is relevant and useful, I can, encourage this behavior. It may happen that not everyone has great ideas, but somebody says, hey, there's no butter. What if we substitute it by margarine? Oh, great idea. I can say that. Because it's in the context and we're learning about stuff, and we're also learning about adapting to when we don't have something. If somebody says we don't have butter, how about I use ketchup? If we're baking chocolate cake, I might say, I will not say great idea. So,
a best medium idea.
Yeah, we could try it and see, who knows, maybe we might come up, but like, ultimately, so this is also the thing, at some point there's things that are supporting the work that we do. But if someone says, this reminds me that, and this is a reference that I steal from Matthew Richter, if somebody says, okay, yeah, I get it, the idea of this workshop and so on, the conclusion is that we should be killing puppies. I'm like, no, we should not be killing puppies. This is not a good thing to do. So like, as a facilitator of learning, I can interject there and can say, no, we don't do that. It was actually about something different.
Right, like there is actually some content here that I want to get across to you. That what you've said is not that. So
Yeah.
I want
Yeah,
to
I mean, you know,
provide the guardrails there. Yeah,
yeah,
but then often as facilitator, we're in situations where where you're not facilitating learning, you're facilitating a discussion, or like your first example with the hospital, where like I don't know what the right answer is, or what a good answer is, or what a good contribution is. So I need to be really careful about how I wield that power as the facilitator.
yeah, and a couple of things that have been really useful for me in that part, in like suspending judgment or postponing opinions, is clean language. I don't know if you're familiar with clean language.
We've had Caitlin on the
Oh,
podcast.
yeah, well, there you go.
But
So please
let's
check
say,
out.
please check out the episode. But in case
Yeah,
someone
please.
hasn't yet, there may be some people out there that haven't heard the episode with Caitlin Walker.
Yeah. So the wrong way to describe clean language, and you know, like I'm not as well versed as Caitlin into clean language with that, but the wrong way to describe clean language is it's a way of asking questions. Because if you take a book on clean language, if you look it up, you'll see questions. So obviously that's what you see. So the real power of clean questions, and you know what? Instead of talking about it, maybe let's just try it out and then do it afterwards. So would you mind if I asked you a couple of questions?
Let's do some clean language questions.
Yep. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll just ask you a couple of questions. We'll just have a conversation. And for the podcast listeners, we'll just, bear with us, and then at some point we're gonna check what happened. Okay. So Dan, I'm curious, when you work at your best, so like you probably have an experience when you worked at your best and so on. So when you work at your best, it's like what?
That's also the example that Caitlin used when she was on the thing.
Ah, well.
So I should have an answer. When I'm working at my best, it's like being a chef in the kitchen with a recipe I know well.
Okay, so it's like being a chef in a kitchen with a recipe you know it. So when you are a chef in a kitchen, what kind of kitchen is that kitchen?
It's my kitchen at home.
It's your kitchen at home. Is there anything else about that kitchen?
I know where all the tools and ingredients are.
Okay, so when you work at your best, you're like a chef in a kitchen. Not any kitchen, just the kitchen at your home, and you know where all the tools and ingredients are. So what kind of tools are those tools?
The pots, the pans, the knives, the spices.
Okay, and so when you work at your best, you're in your kitchen. At home, you know where all the tools and ingredients are. What happens next?
I use them all to make a nice meal.
And what kind of nice meal is that nice meal?
It's like for other people. It's like for my friends or family or for my partner.
Okay, so when you work at your best, you're like a chef in a kitchen, your kitchen. You know where the tools and ingredients are. And then you make a nice meal for others, for your friends and family and so on. Is there anything else about that meal?
Not immediately. I feel like we're quite deep down the rabbit hole. I can't think of anything else about that meal.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. We're just going to stop here. So what happened right now, Daniel, for you?
I imagined in my mind's eye being in my kitchen and grabbing all the stuff and doing all the things we spoke about.
Yeah. And what was so, maybe let's look at the questions that I asked you. What was so particular about them? I mean, I know you know, but like, let's just explore.
They were open questions. They were like paying attention to a certain bit of what I last said, but they weren't. You weren't saying, "Oh, that's a nice kitchen." Or you're saying, what? You didn't say like, "What do you make?" I think you said like, "What happens next?" or something. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So. What I love about the clean questions is that they suspend judgment. They postpone opinions. What kind of meal Well, you could have said it's, I don't know, an omelette or something. What you chose to say is, oh, it's a meal for my friends and family, which puts a totally different spin on it. But if you say, I prepare a nice meal, oh, and which ingredients do you use for that? Again, this is me imposing my view on your situation story. But with the clean, actually, as you said, I use parts of what you said. And what I do, and I think this is also a metaphor that I got from Caitlin, is I may control the spotlight. So I shine a light on stuff that you're saying in order to kind of learn more about it. Not in a prying way, but more in a curious way. Leaving you the possibility to say whatever you want. And to stop wherever you want. So, coming back to why are clean language questions so useful in my practice is they help me be this person that doesn't know anything.
So what might that look like with a group? Like, what kind of clean question might you ask, or where might something like that come up?
Similar to the ones that we ask. So like one clean question is like, okay, if it's a workshop about cooperation, I'm going to ask them, hey, maybe think of a moment where you have been cooperating with people. It can be maybe sports, can be at home, can be at work, whatever. Just picture that and like try to remember what it was like. And then I ask a couple of people, oh, what was it like for you? Oh, it was this, it was that, it was that. And for each of the metaphors, I will go deeper, just like we did. It's not just any kitchen, it's your kitchen at home. You know where the pots and ingredients are. So this gives me a better understanding of the metaphor, of your worldview. And when it's about people working together, so by the way, if you're interested in clean question, I can really recommend you Caitlin's book, From Contempt to Curiosity, because it really distills the way that Caitlin's used clean language to work with groups. So this is really a heartfelt recommendation. So ultimately what happens is that people share their metaphors, and like, let's say that somebody has a kitchen and another one has a wild ride on the river, you know, all in the same boat and so on. But ultimately, if it's about working together, well, they need to figure out how they can make the kitchen, with somebody who knows where the tools and ingredients are, work with the wild ride on a river and co-create their new metaphor together.
And in their own language as well, because it's not saying
Yes.
you're a river rider now. It's like, well, I'm only a river rider in the context of this, but that's it's not imposing someone else's metaphorical language on people, which is, I know, can be difficult. But some people like that. Oh, I like to find out that I'm a river rider.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
Some people find it, stultifying or constraining. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find it super interesting because sometimes people have, so I had it a couple of times ago when I did this about learning, and somebody said, oh, when I learn at my best, it's like walking on a beach and so on, sunset. And then somebody else said, oh yeah, mine is just like yours. It's also about walking. Okay, what kind of walking? Well, it's in a city with a NAVSAT system, and so that I know exactly where I need to go. And in saying that, that person realized, oh, actually, so it's not exactly like yours. So sometimes people think, oh, we're the same. But actually, by exploring the metaphors, we realize how different we are and the different needs that we have. And ultimately, in working together, it's about ensuring that our needs are met.
And that we can talk about them, right? And so if they're not being met, that I feel like I can show up in my own with whatever I need. And as that changes, as I go from being someone that works at their best walking on a beach in the sunset to someone who works at their best riding a river in a storm, it's okay for me to come and say, actually, today I'm feeling more like this and this is what I need.
And ultimately, what happens when people express their needs and use that, what happens is you have a bunch of human beings that take care of themselves. So full agency. Because when I, as a facilitator, I used to help people, okay, let me get you this, let me get you that. I'll, make sure that everyone is feeling nice and cozy and whatever. ultimately I'll rob them of their agency and their possibility to show up as full adults and human beings.
So does that mean in a Jean-Louis facilitation session, I get my own post-its? Like, what does that what does that mean in practicality?
So that means that I take care of the structure. And of course, if I have a workshop with 200 people and so on, I will get enough material for people to do the work. But if somebody at some point needs to, has a specific need, for instance, go to the bathroom, well, I will tell you, you don't need to ask me. When is the break? And, like, wiggle on your chair for a while. Ultimately, it's like, if you need to go, you need to go. And, like, if this is helpful to you, you'll come back. If this is not helpful to you, you can leave, and it's fine. People can make their own decisions, and I trust everyone to make their own decisions. And sometimes people are like, and the habit that we have, that what I see is people will go to me, shall we, we have this 2-day workshop. Is it okay if on that day I'll be away for 1 hour? I'm like, why are you asking me? Because ultimately, technically, I mean, the way I see things is like, you've got your own stuff. If you've got parents to take care of, children to take care of, or whatever, if the house is burning, you'll do whatever needs to be done. I mean, not that I wish this, but like, yeah. But maybe instead of asking me, check with your group. Hey, I'll need to be away from that, and so on. And then they can have a conversation like, what's it like if Dan needs to leave at 3 and comes back at 4? And then it's Dan and his group's responsibility of ensuring that there will be something happening or not.
The group might say, actually, if that's going to be the case, like, kind of need you in the conversation, so let's just all break at 3 and go for a little walk and then come back at 4. And that's a better answer than you saying, yeah, it's fine, and then the group being resentful that they don't have a key person there because you gave them permission to leave.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned earlier, and I forgot to pick up on it, Shitenkotsu?
Almost. Ki Sho Ten Ketsu.
Kisho Tenkutsu. What is it?
The wrong way to describe Kisho Tenketsu is by saying that it's an Eastern storytelling platform that uses a plot without conflict. Because that's what it is if you look it up on the internet. I don't know if you've seen the Korean movie Parasite. Yeah,
yes.
Okay. So, the way that the Kisho Tenketsu narrative works is that at the beginning you set the scene. So I'm not going to spoil Parasite for those who haven't seen it. But you set the scene, and in Parasite it's about a family of, dare I say, losers or people without much money that find a way to work for a rich family. Setting the scene. And then stuff happens. Bit by bit, many of the family members get to work for that family so kind of extort a little bit, like they take advantage of their trust and whatever good nature. In a Western movie, your typical European or American movie, the plot would continue, and at some point the rich family would probably figure out, or the poor family would just kill them all and run off with the money. That would be like standard way of doing. In Parasite, however, there is a plot twist that you would not have expected. I'm just going to say what's in the basement. That's the plot twist. No one has seen it coming. I mean, I didn't see it coming. I don't know whether you did see it coming.
Don't think I saw it coming. It was a long time ago.
I mean,
but I don't think I saw it coming.
Yeah. So there's usually in Asian movies like Chinese and Korean and Japanese movies, there's this kind of plot twist that people would not see coming, and which totally changes the perspective on everything that happened before and creates a totally new possibility. So Kshotenketsu this is this narrative pattern that's being used. And so my friend Francis Laleman, this is like also his way of viewing facilitation, and a bit like his life's work, is approaching facilitation in a Kisho Tenketsu way. Which means that when you run a workshop, you will bring people together, they will do some stuff, and at some point they will actually realize that it was maybe not just about the activities and so on and so forth, but that also some other things have emerged through the careful way of dealing with the 10 principles that I talked about, to also the way of dealing with discomfort, to the, all of these ingredients together will create something totally unexpected for the group. And with that, it creates a bunch of new possibilities.
So is this like it's an overarching philosophy of facilitation, or does it sort of spawn a bunch of practices underneath? Like what does, if I'm a Kisho Tenkotsu, did I get it?
Almost, yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Kisho Tenkotsu.
Close enough. I recognize it, yeah.
If I'm one of those types of facilitator, like what would it be like to be in one of my sessions as opposed to a non-Kisho Tenkotsu facilitator?
So there would be an element of vagueness, especially at the beginning, maybe some confusion, some discomfort. There would be some visible or invisible discomfort as a way of really getting people to come out and express themselves and like try something that hasn't been before. There would be unconventional and very simple activities. You would see people just, talking and maybe moving from one table to the other. I would see like really very active group, or sometimes also maybe very reflective group. But there would be, from 1 minute to the other, you would see different things in the room. So in a conventional workshop, maybe it will be all, nice and, okay, you have 15 minutes to work on this and then you present your results and this. And like in a Kishotenketsu workshop, you never know what will come next, because you want to take up what comes from the group. And like even today, I was with a group and I was with a workshop and we had like half an hour remaining and I was ready to close. And I just like picked on or called someone and said, hey, what would you like to happen next? Like we will finish in half an hour. So what should happen now? And that person said, actually, I'm struggling with something, with a concept, and I would love if you could give me a tip on this. So, okay, let's do this. And in 10 minutes, we explored that thing, and then we closed. So anything can happen. And I would even say that the facilitation is distributed. Maybe you might not see who the facilitator is.
That would be like mega level Kisho Tenkotsu. Who was the facilitator there? We don't know. It was all of us. I am Charles-Louis. No, I am Charles-Louis. I think that's a silly enough place for us to bring this to a close. Charles-Louis, thank you very much for coming on the Intelligent Teams podcast.
Thank you, Daniel, for the invitation. And I will send the references that I talked about. And if there's anything else you need,
ask you. I will share them in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.